Welcome everyone to the Be Better at Negotiating webinar. This webinar is brought to you by CPP, as you probably know. Our presenter today is going to be Pamela Valencia. She's a leadership and team development consultant who has worked with Fortune 500 companies as an assessment expert. In her current role with CPP, she's in the professional services division as one of our solutions consultants and facilitates the MBTI and FIRO certification programs, as well as customized in-house trainings for clients in the entertainment, R&D, hospitality, technology, communications, energy, security, and many other industries. She's MBTI Step 1 and Step 2 certified, as well as a program facilitator for both of those certification programs. CPI 260 certified practitioner, strong interest inventory certified, and FIRO B certified practitioner. So needless to say, she's very well qualified for this. Just as a reminder, we will be sending everyone the slides and the recording of the webinar after the webinar has concluded. Watch for an email from us. Should be coming tomorrow. It will contain a link to the slides from this webinar, a link to the recording of the webinar for you not only to watch again, but also to share with any friends or colleagues you think might be interested. And lastly, after the webinar is completed, we are going to send out a short survey just asking you what you thought of the webinar, if you had any recommendations, too long, too short, too wordy, etc. And also for anyone who registered but was not able to attend, they will also receive all of these pieces of information, the slides, the link to the recording, etc. Also, if you could please hold your questions until the end. We have put aside some time for discussion about anything in the presentation that you might have a question about, and you can use, should be on the right-hand side of your computer, that taskbar. You should have, sorry about that, you should have a little chat area where you can ask questions, but go ahead and hold asking those questions or typing those in until the end of the presentation, because we might answer them throughout the presentation. Lastly, just as a reminder, you can use this information in your own training for your employees or for, if you're a consultant, for your potential customers. Even though all this information is completely relevant for you for your own negotiation skills, we have packaged it the best way we could to make it easy to incorporate into your own conflict management or negotiation training session. We think that this would be great for helping your employees and leaders be better negotiators. So learning skills to be a better negotiator will benefit everyone that they may be negotiating for, leaders or employees, whether that's themselves, their departments, their entire company, as well as helping them be more effective in conflict management. In addition, there's no certification required to use the TKI, which we'll talk about a little later. The TKI is one of the assessments offered by CPP, and one of them that we think is very good for negotiation and conflict management training. You can also help your managers and leaders save time. Less time negotiating means more time working on things that are probably a little more valuable. And typical managers spend 20 to 40% of their time responding to employee conflict. So this is where we feel that negotiation can really help in this area. And lastly, training about negotiation can really help increase employee engagement. Providing learning and professional growth opportunities is a great way to keep your employees engaged, as well as the information that provided can apply to negotiations in your employees or your customers' personal as well as professional lives. And lastly, before we get started, kind of the agenda for what we're going to talk about in this webinar. First, we're going to talk a little bit about what is conflict, what is negotiation. We're going to talk about 4 steps to becoming a better negotiator. We're going to discuss some gender-related negotiation issues from recent studies that have come through the Harvard Business Program on Negotiation. We're going to talk about the TKI assessment and why it adds value to negotiation behavior. And lastly, 5 things you should never say during negotiation, and then a few pre-negotiation tips. So without further ado, I will hand all of this over to Pamela Valencia, who will get started.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm looking forward to it. All right, can everybody see my screen? And that would be you, Melissa. Can you see my screen?
I can see your screen.
You're awesome. Thanks so much. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. First, we're going to begin with conflict. So let's take a look at how it is defined. So conflict, to collide or disagree, to be contradictory or at variance or in opposition. A fight, battle, struggle, controversy, or quarrel. Just hearing those words tends to want to put us into that fight or flight mode. Conflict cannot always be avoided. So what we suggest is to learn how to better manage it. So conflict is basically the result of 2 things. Okay? Interdependence, having to work with or rely on others, as well as differences. With interdependence, there is a whole different realm of internal conflict that is you against yourself. But that's not what we're going to discuss in this webinar. We're going to focus on having to work with others and rely upon them. And differences, well, if you're in agreement with the other person, chances are there probably won't be any conflict. So why are we talking about conflict in a negotiation webinar? Because if there were no conflict, there would be nothing to negotiate. So let's look at negotiate. What is it? To deal or bargain with others, to manage, transact, or conduct. It's to our benefit to practice and learn to manage negotiations effectively. So there's your great quote from John F. Kennedy. And for all you history buffs, ironically, this quote came before the Cuban Missile Crisis. Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. So negotiation can be scary, but what is the cost of not negotiating? Whether it's a salary, a contract, negotiating with other departments, the opportunity cost of not negotiating is pretty high. So why is negotiation intimidating for quite a few of us? Well, for one, it tends to appear as if it's confrontational. Though some people love negotiating, and they are probably the same ones that really enjoy debating, others don't want to be confrontational and can perceive negotiation as aggressive. It makes some people uncomfortable to bargain, whether that's personality-based, culturally-based, or due to other reasons. And people can feel hurt that they've been taken advantage of. And sometimes people perceive that as aggression and that they become defensive. Negotiation is also intimidating because at times there's a lot to lose. Most people don't like the idea of losing, and that dislike is amplified when the stakes are high. So negotiation doesn't need to be intimidating. Okay? Don't think of it as adversarial. Think of it as problem solving. You negotiate every day, but sometimes the stakes are higher. And instead of a win-lose situation, see if you can reframe negotiation in your mind as both parties getting more of what they want. There's a great series of YouTube videos by the Stanford Business School, one of which is by management professor Margaret Neal, who said this: the goal of negotiation is not to get a deal, it's to get a good deal. If you want to watch her video on negotiation or other videos, the link will be at the end of this slide presentation. So there's 3 pieces of negotiation information you should have before you start. Before you start negotiating your good deal, it would help to have thought through or even written out a few key pieces of information. By doing this ahead of time, not only will you be better prepared prepared to negotiate, more confident knowing that you've done your homework. So first, what alternatives do you have in hand? What are the things you can give, and what are the things you want to get out of your negotiation? If you're negotiating a contract, do you have the option of net 30, net 60, or net 90? In a job negotiation, could you barter a higher salary for different or unique working deliverables, or even planning in taking that vacation that you'd already scheduled? Knowing what alternatives you have to work with and what alternatives are not on the table will help you better prepare. Also, what happens if you can't come to agreement and the negotiation fails? Is there an opportunity for both parties to come back at a later point? Do you hire a mediator? Thinking about what happens if negotiation fails will help you set parameters about the meeting. So, what is your reservation price? In other words, at what price is there no difference between a yes and a no for you? In car auctions, a reservation price is the absolute lowest price that the owner will sell a car at, and anything above it is great for the owner. Maybe your reservation price isn't a price per se, but if it's a set of alternatives that you absolutely wouldn't take the deal without, that could also be your reservation price. Knowing your reservation price ahead of time will help you be able to say no if you need to. And sometimes saying no is really challenging for some people, but it's going to be an important skill when it comes to negotiation. What are your aspirations? Why are you negotiating in the first place? What are your long-term goals or aspirations? Even though it may not be the end of the world, if this negotiation doesn't go exactly as you'd like, thinking big picture about your end goals will help you frame the negotiation with those objectives in mind. Okay, so now you've done your homework. Here are 4 tips for the negotiation process itself. So as you're moving through the negotiation process with the other party, assess what are the costs of negotiating in this situation, and what are the possible benefits? Is it worth it? We always want to keep this in the back of our minds. Prepare. What are you trying to achieve, and what is the other party trying to achieve? You've done some homework on your long-term goals. Now think about the short-term goals, within the negotiation. And if possible, practice a little empathy. Try to put yourself in the other person's shoes. What are they trying to get out of the negotiation, long-term and short-term? Doing this might give you more insight into their negotiation process that you haven't considered before. And doing that wonderful list of pros and cons help you to better prepare. Ask. Engage the other party. Don't be afraid to ask questions. If the other party knew everything about you and your motives, there would be likely no reason to negotiate. Also, what's the worst that can happen if you ask for more information? Perhaps the other person will say, I don't know, or I'm sorry, we can't share that. Or maybe you'll get the answer you need. By asking, you'll at least have a chance to find out the unknown. Package. Don't try to negotiate issue by issue. Negotiating issue by issue makes every issue into a conflict. Instead, package your options together and present them that way. In reality, there's some things in the negotiation that you care about more or that are more important to you, but the other party doesn't need to know that. Packaging makes it easier to keep emotions in check and work out a deal. Also, using if-then language is usually a good idea. If I give you this, then I get that. Using the language gives the idea that you're bargaining and willing to give up one thing in order to get another. Okay, now a little bit about gender and negotiations. Gender can be a tricky subject, but it's worth talking about. There are numerous studies on gender and negotiations, but we're only going to cover 2 here. There are a lot of biases that can come into play whenever negotiations occur, and gender is one of them. Just as being aware of personality differences can help you better interact with others, being aware of gender differences can help you become a better negotiator, no matter which side of the table you're on. Here's some truth. Women typically earn less in the same positions over the course of their career than men do. There are many factors that attribute to this. One of them is being that women typically ask for less when negotiating salary. One of the reasons women ask for less, consciously or not, is a self-protective strategy. Many women are aware that being viewed as aggressive, which is contrary to gender expectations, could end up costing them because they will somehow be penalized by the person they're negotiating with, whether female or male on the other side of the table. In a study of simulated job negotiation, men and women were asked to negotiate the starting salary through 5 rounds for themselves and for a friend. Women who negotiated for themselves opened the negotiations at $7,000 less than when negotiating for a friend or when men were negotiating for anyone. Another study showed that the potential for backlash is very real. In a negotiation study, both men and women penalized the woman who negotiated for themselves more than those who negotiated for others, or men who negotiated for anyone. So what can women do? Negotiate for others. Okay. Well, try to link aggressive demands to the needs of others, the department, the organization, family, friends, community. So negotiating on behalf of others will be better received by others. This is one of the recommendations from Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In book and has been used by many others. Frame negotiations so that you're positioning the bargaining for others, whether that be mentally thinking about your salary and how that affects your family, or verbally positioning the negotiations so as to include mention of the other stakeholders, your employees in your department, for example, in the process. Not only will you be likely perceived as less aggressive and more communal in your efforts, but as a female, you'll also likely negotiate higher with those other parties in mind. So what can we do? Increase self-awareness. Okay? Both men and women should think about their negotiation practices and watch out for subconscious tendency to either lowball themselves or view assertive women negotiators as unlikable. Practice negotiating with others. Practice in front of the mirror, or have someone record you. Just as in a job interview, it's important in negotiations to be aware of your body language, the words you use, and how you're actually coming across. What else can we do? Use objective measures. When making requests, women should reference relevant standards and data that the other party can't ignore. Organizations should make sure they base those salaries and benchmarks on objective performance measures. No matter what your gender, you have a way of dealing with conflict and negotiation that's most comfortable for you. Most people are biased in how they handle conflict. Unless someone has had conflict management training, they'll likely use the conflict handling mode that's most comfortable for them. By knowing what your biases are when you deal with conflict and learning how to use conflict handling modes that are not your default, you can become a more successful negotiator. And one of the ways to find out your conflict handling biases is through the assessments such as the TKI, or the Thomas-Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument. For example, anytime I attend a meeting or something where we're discussing solving a problem, where we're having to come to a decision, I can actually see the various conflict handling modes being used in the room, whether somebody is practicing avoiding or compromising or collaborating, due to my understanding of the TKI and the different conflict modes. And here are all 5 listed for you. So we have avoiding, accommodating, competing, compromising, and collaborating. Now, these modes each have different levels or different degrees of assertiveness, which is how much you want to satisfy your own concerns. And different degrees of cooperativeness, or how much you're trying to satisfy others' concerns. So we basically can map these along, these 5 modes, on these 2 axes, because each mode has different degrees of assertiveness and cooperativeness. So basically, if you want to learn more about the TKI, you can visit cpp.com and go to the products TKI. You don't need any certification to use the TKI for yourself or in a training setting, and it's easy to understand, which makes it a very powerful tool for conflict management. Having the understanding that my own personal conflict mode is accommodating gives me that self-knowledge and understanding of where I'm likely to go if I don't think about the fact that I want to get a good deal. So in a negotiation, you can choose to use the conflict handling mode that is most appropriate for the situation rather than your default mode. And based on his behavior, you'll know that that guy is probably using the collaborating conflict handling mode. Because the TKI is based on behavior, by learning the different modes, you can better understand what other people's most comfortable conflict handling modes are. Most people who have not had any conflict management training primarily only use 1 or 2 modes. Now, you might know your most comfortable conflict handling mode is avoiding, okay? And you can decide whether or not you want to use that as a fallback mode, giving the decision, giving the situation, and your skill, how much you practice, and how available those other conflict modes are to you. Think of it as having more tools in your belt to complete a project. So the only way to become more comfortable using each of the conflict modes is to practice them. Understand them, have self-awareness, and practice. So here are a few quotes from customers who use the TKI. We highly support the use of the TKI. It's easy to use, easy to process in a coaching situation, and links very well to our coaching in negotiation using the principled negotiation model from Harvard Law School. We recommend the TKI because it's a great starting point for understanding conflict, why it is important in an organization, and how to work through your natural preferences to get to better solutions. So now that we have some tips for what to do, let's take a look at the opposite end. How about what not to do? Try not to use the word between. When you use between, you're giving people a choice and letting them determine the value of options, rather than suggesting if-then options that allow you to position what's most valuable to you and give up what may not be as important. When using numbers, throwing out a range, a good negotiator will zero in on the best end of that range for him or her and negotiate from there without leaving you any option to take the between back once you've said it. This one happens to be my favorite. No matter how exhausted you are, don't say, I think we're close. This shows that you value reaching an end more than you value coming out with a good deal. Ideally, you want to frame things so that your counterpart is the one who says this, but you probably shouldn't. Don't say, why don't you throw out a number? Research has shown that the final outcome of a negotiation is affected by whether the seller or buyer is the first one to quote a number. When a seller makes the offer first, whether it's a candidate negotiating a salary or a leadership consultant negotiating a contract, the prices end up being higher than when the buyer makes the first offer. So if you're the seller, don't let the buyer be the first to quote a price. Stay away from, I'm the final decision maker. Yeah, even if it's true. You'll benefit from taking 24 hours to think about the terms of the negotiation before agreeing. This is also helpful in case you get cornered and need to get out of the process to think about it. I'm going to say that one more time. You'll benefit from taking 24 hours to think about the terms of the negotiation before agreeing. And last but not least, this is more than keeping the profanity out of the room. It is also key to not let your emotions get the best of you. The best negotiators are calm, collected, and don't get flustered. And of course, this isn't very professional either. So, all right. So 2 more tips for you. And these are really important. Some people tend to get more emotional in conflict situations than others. We've got to be aware of that. One thing that's interesting about conflict is that people of some personality types tend to get more emotionally involved in negotiation situations than others. While the TKI can give you insight into your and others' conflict handling behavior, tools like the MBTI and the FIRO can help you become even more aware of your preferences. With the MBTI, according to Jungian theory, we're hardwired at birth, and those FIRO interpersonal needs tend to develop through young adulthood. So because of that, you know, we're working through that and filtering through our innate preferences. So the TKI is all about skill development. Just remember, you can choose your behavior. Okay? So the better you know yourself, the more self-aware you are, this gives you the chance and the opportunity to step back from reacting to things the way you might typically do. Okay. Last tip for the day. Before you go into the room, think of a past success, something that you did really great at, or you won, or whatever that success was. There's a great TED video by Amy Cuddy, which we'll also provide the link to in the slides after this session, about body language and power poses. And one of the best ways to prepare for negotiation before you walk into the door is to set your frame of mind. So thinking about that past experience, maybe it's a previous negotiation, maybe it's running your first 5K, maybe it's the time you crushed your opponent on Wii, whatever it is. Remember that feeling of winning. Second, take your power pose. This could be any pose where you feel like you have the upper hand. Maybe it's, you know, your fist raised high in the air, yeah. Maybe it's just doing this wonderful lunge, or just standing up straight, posture, head held high. But actually strike that pose in your car or in the elevator or in the restroom. Usually people don't do their pose in public, but it's up to you. And physically moving your body to a powerful position will actually make a difference before the negotiation. So this is how you should look. For example, okay, well, minus the goggles and cape, if that's what you're thinking. Okay, well, keep the cape on. All right, so that is what we have for you on negotiation. And here are the sources listed. So as we mentioned earlier, we've got Margaret Neal, Negotiation, Getting What You Want, Negotiation Strategies for Women, Secrets to Success, Introduction to Conflict in Teams, Amy Cuddy's information on YouTube. So it's hard to write down all the sources for this, but what we have listed here is what you'll get with the email with the link to the slides. So this will be in there too. And I really recommend that you go through and watch all of these and read all of these resources. They're fabulous. So thank you for hanging in there with me on negotiation, and go forth and negotiate. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, Pam, for that great presentation. Actually, if you want to just hop over to the next slide. On that, we do have, if you liked this and you wanted to learn a little bit more, maybe more about the TKI, more about negotiations, we do have a blog. CPP publishes a blog. It's at www.cppblogcentral.com. There's a wealth of information there, and of course, using the search tool is really helpful if you're looking for information on the TKI or on negotiation or conflict management. You can always look up blogs there. We also have a Twitter account at CPP Inc. if you're interested in that, and all of our social media channels, YouTube, Pinterest, LinkedIn, Instagram. You can find those all at cpp.com/getsocial. And then one more slide over, we do also have our CPP customer relations team. So if you're interested in using either specifically this presentation, or you're interested in purchasing the TKI and holding your own negotiation and conflict management training sessions, CPP Customer Relations is who you want to contact. You can reach them at this number or at serve@cpp.com.